Welcome to Woodblock Wednesday, where on Wednesdays we get together and discuss Japanese woodblock prints, paintings, history, and culture. Today's Woodblock Wednesday is actually a really interesting one because it features a Japanese artist who immigrated into the United States and became a U.S. citizen. So technically, he's a Japanese American artist. But I just love his work. His name is Chiura Obata, and he's most known for his landscapes of the Yosemite Valley, yes, and then paintings, of course, of his adopted home of California. There's a lot of paintings of San Francisco and Berkeley, basically the Bay Area. And he has a very interesting sort of biography, and I'll go through that quickly while we're looking at his artwork. But to introduce the pieces we're going to look at today, I just want to sort of trace upon Japanese woodblock prints, the traditional modes of expression. We have, of course, landscapes of the Hokusai and Hiroshige come to mind, and then kabuki actor prints, maybe Toyokuni III. Most of us, if not all of us, have seen those kind of prints. And in the 20th century, there was an attempt to restart that tradition by Watanabe, and he started Shinhanga, and they revitalized landscapes and portraits, Bijinga, beautiful women, of course. And Obata certainly was part of the Shinhanga movement. He worked with a Japanese publisher, Takamizawa, and they produced some incredible woodblock prints, mostly landscapes. However, today's Woodblock Wednesday is going to feature a portrait, which is connected to the tradition of portraiture in Japanese prints, particularly its interest in the performing arts, theater in this case. Without further ado, let's have a look. Okay, so here we are at the table. It's a rather busy looking table. There's a lot of artwork here. Although we're considering only one design by Obata, there's multiple states to examine. And so we'll go through everything. But before I get into the artwork, I'll just outline a little bit of Obata's biography. And so Obata was born in Japan in 1885 and immigrated into the United States. He studied art in Japan, but continued his studies in the United States and became ultimately a professor of art. But he was a professional artist and produced thousands of watercolors and paintings, and of course prints. And he passed away in 1975. The subject of today's conversation is a woodblock print depicting a opera singer. So her name, and I'm going to try to say this correctly, Madame Talia Savanieva. And she performed the role of Madame Butterfly in the opera Madame Butterfly in 1924 at the San Francisco Opera House. And a little bit of information on that, Obata, besides producing this print, and he did this several years after the production, he actually produced the entire stage design for this production of Madame Butterfly. It's a topic that I don't think people really discuss. Woodblock print artists aren't typically the type to produce stage design, but in this case, he was very involved. And that just shows you a little bit of Obata's character. He was very interested in his community. And he fell in love with the the Bay Area. I mean, he lived in Berkeley, he lived in San Francisco. He fell in love with that area and became, a prominent figure, not just an artist. He was involved with the community. And then when the World War II happened, and then all of the issues with the Japanese Americans and the United States, unfortunately, interned all of the Japanese into camps, you know, he was very active in helping other artists. He was an active artist in the internment camps, held, you know, little meetings with artists and produced artwork alongside with them. A lot of that artwork has made it to auction. So if you Google Obata internment camp art, you'll see a lot of that, particularly the art that his colleagues produce, which he certainly encouraged. But in this case, coming back home to San Francisco in the Bay Area, you know, he's so involved with the community that, of course, you know, he was the local artist that everyone admired and knew, and produced this stage design for the Opera House for this production. So I just think that's really, really neat. And so we will see a little bit of Obata's flair for the dynamic in this composition. We'll get into it in just a moment. Let me see, what else can I say? You know, obviously, if you're new to, you know, Obata's work, I highly recommend Googling him. And you'll see, you know, all of his body of work, particularly his woodblock prints of the Yosemite Valley. But let's move closer to the table and have a look at this design. Now, what I have here is a striking and very rare suite of prints. There's 7. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, there's 7 pieces altogether. This is the key block, the original key block for the design. And so for those of you who are not familiar, woodblock prints are produced with multiple blocks that are carved. And the key block is the first block that's carved that outlines the design. And then the subsequent blocks are produced, they're color blocks, so that the color gets added within the line. So the key block is kind of you can look at it as kind of a page out of a coloring book. And, you know, the goal is to stay within the lines. And so I just want to show you how detailed and yet how soft the printing is. It's funny, when I see this key block, it's so finely printed. It almost reminds me of a drawing. In fact, I kind of almost think of Goyo's drawings when I look at this key block. It's so beautifully rendered, so soft and elegant. And so imagine this key block was first produced, and then they made other impressions of this key block on sort of tissue-like paper that it was pasted onto other blocks that was used to carve the other elements, the other color elements within the composition. So this key block, it's important to have. It's a document of how the print was produced, the process of printing. And also, they're just rare. They were only made technically it's to render into other blocks, and maybe only a handful survived, if that. And so this piece, to have this piece and be able to look at it when we compare it to the other finished prints, that's just a wonderful opportunity. It's so very rare to be able to do that. So one last look. You know, so I'm starting again, I'm doing this horizontal format when we're considering the artwork on the table. I think it's working. I've gotten really positive feedback from all of you, so thank you. I'm going to keep doing it this way. So the next print we'll consider is actually the finished print. I put these next to each other, but so you could kind of see where the print begins and where it ends. So many colors were added. Now, quite frankly, I'm not going to sit here and count the number of colors, because that's also kind of false. It leads you to think there's so many blocks, but typically when you make a print, you sometimes overprint the color to get a deeper, richer intensity. So, you know, if you count like 10, 12 colors, that doesn't mean there were 12 different impressions onto that piece of paper. It could have easily been double. It just depends on how the printer decided to apply the colors onto the print. But you could see how beautiful that is. I mean, look at that careful bokashi, or the gradation of color from light to dark. It gives you a sense of kind of an outer robe that's sheer, that is also reflecting in light. You could see the color of a robe is, it's the element of the design that's the busiest and the brightest, and it draws the eye up towards her face. And of course, the composition in terms of how the color is applied, you could sort of make an analogy of the drama of a play. And with any successful composition, the composition has to work in concert with the colors to create drama and to create interest, but also help the eye move in the direction the artist wants the eye to move. And so the way that this design, I think it's subtle but beautiful. The bokashi, the light to dark, moving the eye up, the light, the bokashi of the colors that just sort of, they're there. It's a hint of color, and then they intensify as the color goes up. And then, of course, her neck emerges right at the height of war. The colors are so bright. And the eye moves towards her beautiful face. And her face is rendered with such care. You could see, look at her eyebrows and the makeup that's been applied, and her eyelashes. Excuse me. And then, of course, look at her hair. It's not a solid black. There's multiple printings of this black and gray with some white to give the effect of light reflecting. It's a stunning work to produce that. And again, this is what we started with. Now in the background, it's kind of hard to tell, and I'm going to try to hold up the print at an angle, but the entire background has an application of silver mica. And that's quite traditional. Prints by Katundo, Goyo, even some Shinsui designs have mica background. Those designs should come to mind. But also within the tradition of Bijinga, we also have the prints of Utamaro with a beautiful silver background. So, this is firmly rooted in the tradition of woodblock printmaking in Japan. Though Obata, being a Japanese-American artist, is capturing a Western opera singer who performed in the West. So it's a really interesting cultural sort of exchange in this composition. So I'd like to move, although as much as I love this impression, it's a beautiful impression, there's others that we can consider. And now I want to point out that these three are finished impressions. Are they proofs? Okay, probably. But you could also consider them as finished impressions for themselves. Everything in this print is done. There is and on top of that, you could see that Obata was pleased with this impression because he signed it as he signed his finished print. And I should point out with Obata prints, they're not all signed. There's a certain amount of his Takamizawa published prints that just weren't signed by him. And that's okay. The market does not differentiate between signed and unsigned copies. They go for about the same. But in this suite, they all have been signed. And so that adds a little bit of an extra oomph to the set. But it also suggests that these prints were finished. They're not really trial proofs in the sense that they were used to figure out how the final print should look, in the sense that they're sort of fragments of the printing to produce this print. These are not those things. These are finished prints. And so I just want to come in, and you could see, in this case, there's no bokashi that's here. The robe is just suggested by the area of the paper. That's the actually natural color of the paper that's coming through. You could kind of see a little bit of mica that's been smeared from the printing process that's on there. And then you could see how beautifully rendered the color of her robe is. It is the colors that we see in the finished standard print, but you know, he removed some colors and he's kind of testing out to see how this design would work with a little bit less color. Perhaps this print predates this print and he's just trying to figure out, should I add more? Is this enough? But he did finish this print because we could see the face is beautifully rendered. There's a little bit more pink in the face and around the neck. I don't know if the camera is picking that up, but when you look at this here, her face is a bit more white. And this looks to my eye as more makeup she would wear for her performance. Like this is, you know, the depiction of her on stage or just about to go on stage. Here, this is a little bit more realistic, as I would imagine her. So her makeup is not as severe in terms of the white. There's more pink in there, which I think it's neat to see. The hair is about the same. And this mica has been applied directly onto the print. The background does not have a pigment. So the background here, there's like a pinkish salmon color with a little bit of gray, and the mica is applied over that. But here, it's just the mica right directly onto the white of the paper, which is really cool, actually. I find that really interesting. Now, moving on to the next piece, here we have something similar. We still have some pink in the face, a bit more pink than the finished print, but not as much as the one we just looked at. And in the background, there's a light pigment. I would say it's kind of a very light lavender. It's moving towards the finished background, but it's very light, but it is not the white of the paper. So that adds a stronger contrast. And then of course the color has a lot more color, and it's basically the format that we have in the finished print. But we don't have the color to the outer garment. It's still the color of the paper. So you could see that, you know, Obata is working out the details to see how the finished print is going to be rendered. Now one can ask, is this Obata making these decisions, or is it the publisher? It could be both. And if I had to bet, I think it's more the publisher than Obata, because I don't know if Obata was in the room when these things were printed. Now maybe, but typically the Obata would probably have produced a watercolor that looked pretty faithful to the finished print, and these early printings were, I'll call them proofs, although earlier I said they weren't proofs, but because they're finished. But at the same time, they're attempts at trying to figure out what the finished work is going to look like. Sometimes these early printings have less to them because the publisher's trying to figure out how much to add and keep it economical. The other artists did it the opposite. Hiroshi Yoshida, his early printings of his early designs, they're all printed by him, and he added a significant more to the printings, extra blocks of color. And then he removed some, trying to figure out, okay, how do I produce this without as many blocks? So here we're adding blocks. And in my other videos where I discuss Hiroshi Yoshida, and I've shown some early period pieces, I discuss that process. But anyway, I just think it's really fascinating to see the progression. And now what we have here is it's very similar to this work. But there's subtle changes. The face is a little bit different. Again, I don't know how well the camera's picking up the nuances. But the pigment, it's more pronounced in the ear. You could see there's more pink. And so the eye makeup is a little bit more pronounced. Again, it's more stage makeup, but you still have the pink. And it's interesting to see that in the finished print, the pink is there, but it's more with the white of the powder that on her face. That reminds us of geishas and other bijinga from Japanese prints. So, you could see that. It's kind of interesting. Oh, and I should point out, before we move on to a few other things, that the back has this really interesting stamp. Made and printed in Japan at Takamizawa, Color Print Studio. And this you don't normally see on the prints. And there's a different stamp, and it's a different, it's not this configuration. This one's a little bit different. And here there's a box for the number, which you do see on his prints. And here it's been filled out as number 1. And I think that's a sample. So, this perhaps was produced and signed by Obata so that Takamizawa would have samples to show. It's interesting why publishers produce variants. Here we also have the number 1 with the word sample right next to it. And on this one, I don't think there's any number in it, and it doesn't say sample. We still have the stamp, but I think that's fascinating. All of the differences between these impressions. Now, I want to move on to a couple other pieces which are interesting, and there's a light overhead, and so it's creating a little bit. The scroll doesn't have dramatic wrinkling. It's just more of the fact that it's been rolled up and then there's a dramatic light overhead. But this is a lithograph that's printed on silk and mounted as a scroll. And this is not from the original matrix that produced these woodblock prints. It's a lithograph. It's a completely different process. And why does this exist? Which is kind of interesting. I think Takamizawa produced these lithos to promote the woodblock prints. And, perhaps lithography was somewhat new in Japan at this time, but it was a cheaper means of production than printing a woodblock print. And so Takamizawa can produce these lithos quite easily and then put them on, in this case, on a Japanese presentation board or shikishiban, and present this to people. The title is there, and and mounting it as a scroll is also an effective way of showcasing the design, and and it just adds another interest to this suite, having these two very different versions. These two are the exact same thing. They're two lithographs, but here we have it on a Japanese presentation board, and then here it's mounted as a scroll. So visually, it's really striking to have it on a scroll. But what we have here, this is a better lighting. I could just show you what it looks like, and it looks different. It looks very different from the original printing. There isn't as much care. There isn't as much color. And, it does an effective job to show the design. And it certainly highlights Obata's skilled draftsmanship here. But it doesn't show the subtle beauty of woodblock prints and what is possible in woodblock prints. So, it's an interesting work of ephemera. And in this case, I'm offering this entire set for sale as one collection. So that's kind of neat for an Obata collector or someone interested in the theater to have multiple facets of design and how they were produced. And in this case, we have two works that reflect promotional material versus the actual artwork itself. And let me move back to my original position, and I've included two books of Obata's artwork that are really great. So if you're interested in learning more about Obata's work, these two are the books to acquire. So I'm just going to zoom in so you could see everything one last time. So I'm going to sort of correct myself a little bit. I didn't call these proofs. You can call them proofs. I don't want to get into semantics. I did want to emphasize that they're all finished in a sense that they're all signed. And are they dated? No, they're just, this one is dated actually, 1930. And this one is just signed. And usually with proofs, they're not signed. And they're a little messier. This one is a little bit messy with the mica there. But as proofs, I could see the argument they're proofs because they were used to figure out how the final design should look. And so in that way, they're proofs, and they're quite valuable pieces to consider when you're thinking about the finished print. But I want to emphasize they're all signed, which is somewhat unheard of for proofs, and even for Obata's work, because the vast majority of prints out in the market aren't even signed. And so the fact that we have these all signed, it was special, and they were used for a purpose, maybe promotional. And Takamizawa had them in the studio to show different states. But they were certainly produced and kept for a purpose. But for today's Woodblock Wednesday, their purpose here is to help us appreciate the complexity of making woodblock prints from the first impression to the last. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining me today on Woodblock Wednesday, where we discussed one of Obata's very striking portraits of an opera singer from San Francisco. I think it was a really interesting conversation where we looked at this design in multiple states with quite a bit of differences. And I just want to encourage all of you, if you're new to the channel, I have over 100 videos archived here on YouTube. And I encourage you to have a look at all of the other videos that I've done over the last 3 years. And of course, if you're interested in Japanese prints, have a look at my website, collectingjapaneseprints.com. We offer a variety of prints from Edo period to Shinhanga, Sosakuhanga, and contemporary. And we also have a bookstore. So we have rare out-of-print references for the collector, and I think they're really useful if you're getting into seriously collecting prints. And a few other things coming up. We will start offering collector supplies soon. So keep your eye out for that. Archival boxes, we are also, that are bespoke. So they're done to order. We're working with a professional artisan who makes these boxes for collectors. We also will start offering handmade Japanese paper that you can use as folders for your prints, as well as there's a carpenter that I've started working with, and he made a wonderful print cabinet for me. And I thought, well, why not introduce his woodworking skills to the world? And so we will also be offering the ability to we can work with you on advising you on how to build the appropriate cabinet for your home, and we have a woodworker that can produce the cabinets. So some really wonderful things coming up, and not to mention, of course, last but not least, I'm working on an exhibition of 100 new prints to the website that will be going up on the website in a couple of weeks, so keep an eye out for that. And last but not least, if you are interested in selling any of your Japanese woodblock prints, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always interested in buying prints, so don't be shy, reach out. So thank you very much for joining us at this week's Woodblock Wednesday, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Until then.